Welcome back to the 25 Days of Flows, the Power Automate Advent Calendar. Today we're up to day 10, and we're continuing our suite of flow gifts in the area of approvals. Today, we're going to learn how to use the outcome of approvals in our subsequent actions of our flows. So far, we've introduced approvals, we've kind of broken down the different pieces, we've created one. We've also created one that waits until the approval is finished, but we haven't yet used the outcome of that approval. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's start by reviewing our connectors. We're going to use approvals, we're going to use the common data service, and we're going to use planner. The common data service is the only premium connector here today. Basically, what's going to happen is in our model-driven app, we have an entity called contracts, where we onboard new contractors. These are people in our entities that already have an account, but now they are opening up a contract. As soon as the contract is opened, we want to start an approval process that a team uses to validate that the contract is solid, it has covered all its bases, there's a signature document stored somewhere, etc. If the contract is valid, then it will create a task in Planner for the team that's responsible for putting together the materials for the contractors. Right now, our company, let's pretend, our company cannot define this in such a way that we could automate the delivery of the materials. So we have to pass it to a team who looks over the contract, who looks over the account state and the account industry, etc., to determine what pieces they need in their onboarding package. And so they won't even start that work until we've assured that the contract has been signed and that all the pieces are in place from a contract perspective. So that's what our approval is going to help us with, making sure all the pieces are in place. And as soon as someone clicks yes, they are, then we'll create a task in Planner. Okay, so let's go over to flow. Well, let's start in Power Apps really quick to understand what a contract is. So we actually have a model-driven app here that is managing contracts. See if I can refresh this a little bit. And so in this particular app, we have all our contract information, and then each contractor has related change orders and activities and social profiles, etc. So what we're saying is every time we have a new contractor, so if I go to my contract management, every time we get a new contractor, we want to open up an approval process, and then if it looks like everything's in place, then we will add a planner task. Now note, later on in the 25 days of flows, we're going to learn how to do this using a business process flow. But for right now, we're going to use an approval flow to manage this bridge. So this is what I call a gateway approval. It's a handoff approval. It's passing something from one place to another, but it's validating that everything is in place. Okay? So let's go to our flows and create a new automated flow. I'm just going to check my environment. Now, when you're building flows for the common data service, it is best to put your flows in the same environment with your model-driven apps or your CDS entities. And even better than that is to put them all together in a solution. Today, these are not going to be solution aware, just for the sake of time. And we're just going to make sure that the flows are in the same environment with the model-driven app and the entities, okay, which is this CDS demonstrations. All right, so we're going to do new automated, and we're going to call this approval for contract onboarding. Okay, and then we're gonna look for record, because all of our common data service connections have these three in common: when a record is deleted, when a record is created, and when a record is updated. In this case, we're going to use when a record is created. And we're going to create that flow. And then most 9 times out of 10, you can choose current here. But if you're in an environment that's different from where your database is, you may want to change, right? But current follows along with the best practice of keeping all of this together and also facilitates migrations. All right, so now I'm going to change my entity and I'm going to look for contracts. Okay, notice how I can just start typing and it'll filter down. And then as far as my scope goes, this is going to be an organizational scope. Okay. It could also be a user scope in this case because there's only me working in this environment. All right, now when that record is created, I want to start an approval. So I'm going to go ahead and put my approval in there. And we're going to do create an approval. And first to respond will be good enough, and approve and reject is fine. Now, I might want to do something different from approve to or reject, because in this case, they're not actually approving or rejecting anything, because that's the account managers that approve or reject contracts. What they're really doing is validating them. So I might want to choose custom responses and then validated or missing components. Okay, you can do that kind of thing if you want. And I'll just put here, new contract has been created. Please validate. And then I'm going to assign this to myself just because of the video. And then the details are, please review the new contract and respond whether it is valid or missing components. If any components are missing, please clarify in your comments. And then thank you. Now the link, when you look at this output from this particular, I'm just going to save. Every now and then I'll save. As long as I don't have any required fields pending, I can save. If you do have a required field that's pending, let me just show you. I will empty it out. Notice the flow checker goes red, and the flow checker will let you know that this is required to save this. Okay? Love the flow checker. Keep your eye over there. You can usually learn something from it. All right, so the outputs from when a record is created includes all of these things here. Now, the name is a GUID, so that would be a unique identifier if you need one. But it doesn't actually have a item link, you know, like you might be used to with SharePoint, link to item, right? So in this case, we have to create our link, which is pretty easy to do. So I wanted to open up, I wanted to open up contracts right here. So if you notice here, if you can't see it, but I'm copying the URL from the page of the contract, and now I'm going to open up Notepad. I could open up anything I want, but I'm going to open up Notepad. Okay, maybe I'm not. Here we go. It's because my presentation was going. So in this notepad, I'm going to paste this URL to the contract. Actually, that's the wrong page. We're going to go to the contract and open the contract. All right, so here's the contract itself. All right, so now I'm going to take that URL. So all I'm doing is going up into the browser URL, and I'm pasting what's in there right here so that you can see it. Notice it starts with my Dynamics instance. It moves into the app ID because this is a model-driven app. It tells us which entity we're working with. This is the internal name of the entity. And then finally, it has a query string that says what the ID of the contract is. So you can probably guess I'm going to take the beginning of this, everything except the ID, and I'm going to cut that. And then I'm going to go back to my flow, and my link will actually be that plus the ID. And the ID is in name. Now, if you want to check this, if you go to your entities and you open up the contracts entity, you can look very easily at the internal names right here. And you see the one that's contracts ID is where our ID is. So let's go back to flow. Up. Excuse me, I'm being slow. All right, contracts. Unique identifier for entity instance. I think this one is good enough. We can always check it. Let me just look back there at Power Apps again. So contracts ID is under contract. So you see this is the internal name and this is the display name. So usually when you're looking in this area here, like in the dynamic content, you look for the display. You know, what do people see when they're looking at the entity? If you're in an expression or an OData query, you need that logical internal name, okay? So I'm going to use contracts, and then I'm going to say open the contract. Okay, that's all I'm going to say there. Okay, so now I'm creating an approval. I'm assigning it to myself, and I'm providing instructions and a link to the new contract right here in my approval. All right, so now I'm going to save that. All right, and I'm going to post it to me in the Teams. So in this particular case, imagine I want to post to someone in Microsoft Teams because I know that's where they work most of the time. So let's go ahead and post it to their team. I'm going to post it to a user in Teams though. In the other video we did to a channel. This is just so that you see both. I'm going to post it to a user. Okay, and notice the recipient should be, we used create an approval. We should use the approval's email. Only thing is we may get a bunch of, we're going to get an apply to each in the case that this has more than one, but that should not be a problem. So watch what happens when I click on approval email. And notice that these adaptive cards all have plurals. Approvers, 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 details. It's all plural, right? And so it's preparing itself. The approval cards are preparing themselves for more than one person. Even if you say first to respond, you are still speaking of a table of people, more than one. So as soon as I hit this approver's email to post it in Teams to them, it goes into an apply for each. And that's fine because it will still only do one, even though um, it thinks it's doing many. All right, and it will put the approver's email in there, and it'll put the approvers as an array in the apply to each. Now, I'm just going to use the adaptive card here to communicate with them. All right, now remember the card is going to give them validated or missing components. Okay, now we're going to wait until they respond. With this one, they could respond from their email, from their approver center on the desktop, the approver center on their mobile phone. But then we added the adaptive card as a flow bot, which will be posting to them on Teams in the activity feed. And you'll see that. I'll show you. Whichever one is responded to first, we're going to wait on it, right? So we're going to do wait for an approval. There's not a lot of waits, so I did wait for an approval. And then I put the approval ID. Again, like I mentioned to you in the last video, if you're ever doing more than one approval in a single flow, then make sure you rename these actions so that you don't get confused, because it is possible to be waiting for the wrong approval ID, okay? So go ahead and put that in there. Basically, the action of the approval name should match where you got your approval ID from. So now we have a waiting scenario. But here's our thing. We have a condition. If they say valid, then we're going to go ahead and create the plan a task. If they say validated. But if they say missing components, we just want to email somebody and tell them that this is not ready. Okay, so I'm going to use validated as my condition, and I'm going to add a condition. And in this condition, I'm going to look for the wait for an approval action, because I need the response, and the response that they gave is held in the output of the wait for an approval. And so I look down this and I find outcome, the outcome of the approval. Now, outcomes, like other things in approvals, can contain more than one item. Because if there's more than one person approving, then the outcomes will be separated by a comma or a semicolon. So what I'm going to do here is click outcome, but I'm not going to leave is equal to. I think it's a good habit to just always use contained here, even when you only have one person. I'm going to use contains, and then I'm going to type validated. When you're working in our conditions, you don't have to put quotes like this around it. You only have to use quotation marks when you're in an expression. All right? Now, lovely little feature that I adore is now you can add a bunch of rows to one condition. So I could also say, let's see, the title starts with, so this is the title of the approval. So you can begin to triage your approvals. And what I mean by that is that some of them can be related to model-driven apps, some of them can be related to SharePoint, some of them can be related to something else. If you set up a system in your approvals, you might be able to use them to classify your approvals. But you would also have to have something in your actual record that we could use as well. So here I've used the title. Did I use it for the wait? I wanted to use it for the create. So I want to use the title, and this is where you can see it's important that I pay attention to the action that I want to use in this condition. In this case, I don't want to use the wait. I want to use the create and approval, because I have taught my team a way of separating these or distinguishing these by a little prefix in brackets. All right. So now we'll know when we're in the approval center, we'll be able to recognize all the approvals related to model-driven apps because they have the prefix model. But everybody has to like buy into this idea. You can't do it unless everybody buys into it. Okay. So if the outcome is validated from the response and the title of the approval starts with model, now we're going to create the planner task. So now we're going to look for planner, and it has really nice create a task. It's going to sign me in because I haven't used this in this entity, in this environment yet. And all of these IDs, don't let them scare you. Just drop down the drop down and you'll see your different planners, okay? So I'm going to look for the planner called, or is it contractor? Let me just check. So let's go to planner. I think I want this one, account documentation. Let's see if we see that one. Yeah, it's at the top. So we're going to use account documentation. And then it wants to know which plan, account documentation. And then the title of it is going to match the, I could use anything I want. I could continue to use the title from the approval, if that helps me triage also in planner. And I can put a little dash there and add the contract name. So let's add, hold on, up. Let's add the contract category. And then for the bucket ID, this depends on what you have available in planner. Looks like I only have to do. If I had in progress and finished and so forth, it would come up there. Now here's something to notice. If you add things while your flow is open, it won't show them like live. So what you can do, like let's say I made that change while I was building my flow. I could just delete that task and add it back. So I'm going to add it back, repetition for emphasis, create the planner task. And now if I choose account documentation, and then I'm going to use the approval title with a dash and the contract category, then my bucket ID, it's still not there. So sometimes it'll take a little while to get that to show up because I just added it. All right. Now the start date and time could be the date that the approval was, completed. So I can go ahead and use that as a start date for my task. And then if I want to calculate a due date, let's say I want to give everybody 5 days to do this. I'm going to add a date time action. We have these really nice ones called add to time, convert time, get future time, get past time, subtract. All right, so I'm going to get future time, and then I'm going to take that completion date from the approval. I'm going to move this up just one. Sometimes I have trouble moving up to the top, so just move the top one underneath that and it'll work sometimes a little better. And then I want here, I've lost my approval times, which is okay because I could also use, I think I want to use the approval times. So what you can do is put a question mark in the expression, and then you should see everything. So that will open up everything to you. And what I want here is the approval completion date. I will remove the question mark and say okay. So now I've used that there. And then I want to say day. I'm sorry, I did this wrong. So this is the interval. So I want 4 days. And you can read. Specify the time interval between the current time and the desired future time. So I don't even need to say what time it is now. It picks up on what time it is at this point that I inserted it into the workflow. So that's even better. So all I have to do is say, give them 4 days from the current time. So 4 days from the current time. So this is, I'm just going to rename this and say, add 4 days to the current time. And the current time is the time that we get done with everything before that condition and we arrive right here. This current time does not exist in the no yet, okay? Because I didn't put it over there. All right, so this is now my deadline. So when it says due date, I can use that future time. And then I can use emails or IDs here. Just for the sake of the video, I'm just going to give this to myself. You know what else I could do? I could use a dynamic tag from the creation of the record. So from the trigger, I could use maybe the created by. But I'm going to go ahead and put my own email address here. And then I'm going to save. All right. Basically, I have nothing happen if that's not true. But I probably would send an email to someone and let them know it's not happening. Right now, I'm just going to put a compose here. And ask this one to give me just time. So UTC now, just give me time, right? Because I don't care what's over here. I could leave nothing. But this is like what happens if this is not valid, all right? But all I'm really trying to capture here is if it's valid, create a planner task. In real life, I might send an email over here to somebody who might be able to resolve this problem. And then you'd know who that is if you were part of this process. It probably would be the account manager for the contract. So the primary contact. Okay, and that's also in the CDS database. So now we're going to save this. Let's give it a quick look over. So we've got the contract, scope user, create an approval. It's going to create an approval. It's going to take that approval and post a card to the user one at a time. In this case, there's only one user. It's going to wait for that user to approve, then, or reject. And in this case, the options are validated and missing components, all right? So if they give that validated answer and the approval card title starts with model, and we'll get to see why I've suggested this to give you a little side tip, then it's going to calculate when 4 days from today would be, and then we use that in a created task as the due date. So we're giving them a 4-day deadline. All right, so let's save this. And after it says saved up there, I go back to my flows, and this message kind of bogus. Just click OK. All right, so now I'm going to go back to my contracts area. And I'm going to create a new contract. And basically, if I do this, they're all there. And so at the top of every model-driven view like this, there's the ability to hit the new button to create a new record. Remember that you should edit your forms before you hit the new button so that they have whatever you need them to have. And I'm going to name this contractor 4 sample. It's going to be associated with this first company. The bid value is going to be 100,000. That's what they got. That's what they bid for. In the beginning, their baseline will be the same because nothing has changed. No POs have been granted, so their bid and their baseline are the same. Their completion value is not yet calculated because they haven't completed the contract. I can classify them as to what they are. And this time we're going to do a design engineer because all our contractors say contractor 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, I guess we'll do contractor because I named it contractor 4. The contract deadline is how long they have to finish this thing. Let's give them a little over 6 months. And new fencing around campus. So they got 6 months to finish that fencing, and they're starting on the 16th. Their status is active, and if they have a WBS code, I will put that in. So now I have created a new contract. I'm going to save and close. Our flow should trigger. And this is not instant. Okay, so it took a few seconds, right? And so let's look and see what's going on. The record was created. The approval was created. The post to teams was done for one user. Notice above in your apply to eaches, it actually tells you 1 of 1. So it lets you know exactly how many runs it made. And you can flip through them, right? So right now, the only one is to me. But if there was others, I could hit next and view them one at a time. Really like that in regards to apply to each. And I'm talking about the run page, not the edit page. So you'd have to be on the run page to see this. And now it's stopped. Notice our condition is still gray. Because why? It's waiting for me to say whether this is valid or not. All right. So let's go to Teams. All right. Now in Teams, notice that we don't have anything happening in the actual team instances, but I've got a notification that the Flowbot has sent me a card, an adaptive card. All right. I've also got a notification up here, and I've got a little red dot over here. But I believe it's this chat right here. Let's click on it, and yep, this is the new card that the Flowbot sent me. If I move this out of the way, you'll see that it is exactly what we prepared. We can open the contract. Let's test that. There we go. There's the new contract that we just made, beautifully open. So I can review that and then come back here. It says, please review the new contract and respond whether it's valid or has missing components. If any components are missing, please clarify. So I'm going to go ahead and say validated. Good to go. And when I hit submit now, the flow is going to pick up that that approval is finished. And it's going to start running our condition block. And notice at the condition level in the run screen, we can see whether or not the condition we put in there was true or false. And we can see that the right side didn't run because it was true. And on the left side, we calculated a date and we created a task. And we can see that the due date is the 14th. So that worked out really well. And the title is model. So we've got this little prefix running from our approval into our planner task. So you could use prefixes like that to query your data or organize your data. I think if we look at the approval dashboard, because we already approved it, it'll be in our history. But notice how it has the model prefix, which would enable you, let's suppose you wanted to find all your model-driven approvals, you could just search for them like this. Now, in my opinion, this example that I'm using wouldn't be that beneficial because I don't care so much about model versus canvas when it comes to approvals. But I could use different kinds of prefixes like um, finance, maybe for all finance approvals, or external for any approvals that involve external participants. So you can start to have naming protocols here that help you to quickly filter and sort through your historical approvals or any that are currently waiting for approval. So give it a try, kind of see if you can leverage these. Now let's go look at Planner to make sure it ended up there. And there it is. It's got the model, the new contract has been created, please validate. If I open this up, it has the due date it has the start date and the due date as we expected. And it actually adds a comment to say that it's created this. Wonderful, right? And it's assigned to me. So worked out really well. You can see how easy it is to use the outcomes of your approvals in your subsequent actions in order to make your process much more powerful and much more responsive to what happens. I wish you a happy holiday, and I hope you're enjoying the 25 Days of Flows, the Power Automate Advent Calendar. See you tomorrow.